Welcome to our book summary channel. Here, we provide concise and informative summaries of all kinds of books. We hope you find our summaries helpful and informative.
The History of British India is a book written by James Mill in the early 19th century, which covers the history of British colonization and rule in India. The book is notable for its highly critical view of British rule in India, and for its argument that British colonization was responsible for the economic, social, and political decline of India. In the book, Mill argues that British rule in India was characterized by corruption, exploitation, and oppression, and that it had a devastating impact on Indian society. He contends that British colonial policies led to the destruction of Indian industries, agriculture, and commerce, and that they left India impoverished and dependent on Britain. Mill also criticizes the British for their treatment of Indian people, arguing that they were treated as inferior and that their rights and freedoms were systematically violated. The book was highly controversial upon its publication and was widely criticized by British officials and scholars. It has been seen as a seminal work in the field of Indian history and is still widely read and studied today. The book, which is written from a perspective of utilitarianism, has also been criticized for its lack of attention to Indian culture, religion, and tradition. It is important to note that Mill's view on India's history is highly biased and subjective, as he wrote the book during a time when India was under British rule. Therefore, it is important to read and understand it in the context of its time. In addition, Mill presents a narrative that portrays British rule as a necessary step towards progress and civilization, and that it ultimately led to the improvement of the Indian people's lives. He also suggests that British rule led to the introduction of modern institutions and systems, such as law, education, and administration, which ultimately benefited India. However, his arguments have been criticized by many for being one-sided, and for ignoring the negative consequences of British rule. Mill's book was widely read and discussed in the 19th century and was influential in shaping the British public's understanding of India and of British rule in India. It was also used as a justification for British colonial policy in India. However, it has also been criticized for its lack of attention to indigenous perspectives and for its Eurocentric view of Indian history. Overall, The History of British India by James Mill is a highly influential and controversial work that presents a unique perspective on the history of British rule in India. It is important to read and understand it in the context of its time and to consider other sources and perspectives when studying the history of British India. It's also worth noting that James Mill was a leading figure in utilitarian philosophy, which held that the moral value of action was determined by its usefulness in promoting the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. This view is reflected in his book, where he argues that British rule was necessary for the improvement of the Indian people's lives and that it ultimately led to their greater happiness. However, this view has been criticized for being insensitive to the cultural and historical context of India and for ignoring the suffering and oppression of the Indian people under British rule. Additionally, it's worth noting that the book has been criticized for its lack of attention to the Indian resistance against British rule and the Indian voices that opposed it. It also lacks attention to the social and cultural impact of British rule on India, such as its impact on the caste system, religion, and tradition. In conclusion, The History of British India by James Mill is a highly influential and controversial book that presents a unique perspective on the history of British rule in India, but it is important to read it in the context of its time and consider other sources and perspectives when studying the history of British India. It is also important to be aware of the biases and shortcomings of the author's perspective.
Thank you for visiting our channel, Explore Books. We hope you found the summary informative and helpful. Don't forget to check out our other summaries, so please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon for more updates. Happy reading!